Welcome and thank you for joining. Welcome to CyCognito's EASM in Context, Turning Surface Data into Security Insights. My name is Lee Papworth, and today our hosts will be Rob Gurzeev, CyCognito's CEO and co-founder, and Jason Pappalexis, CyCognito's Senior Technical Marketing Manager. Before we begin, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar will be recorded and shared after the event on demand. And we will reserve some time at the end to respond to questions. Please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A section at any time. Jason, over to you.
Great, thank you, Lee. Let's begin. So, Rob, in today's evolving threat landscape, knowing what you're looking at isn't enough. You need to understand what the data means. Context is critical. IPs and URLs are only the start. Some folks believe that all asset management is the same, but false positives and noise make external exposure management especially challenging. What do you think?
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think that especially in the last few years where it has become easier than ever to build new applications, make changes in how the network is configured. Now even vibe code and create and change things faster than ever on the one hand, and on the other hand, you have more diverse technology everywhere. And I would also say that so these are some conditions making things challenging. You add to that resource constraint, budget constraint makes it even more challenging. And there's really two orders of magnitude gap from what we're seeing between what teams can easily do in terms of number of alerts they can handle, etc., versus what's in front of them, which is especially true on the external side, which we'll discuss and focus on today, because the internal exposure side can be generally very well handled with integrations, and you already have agents and lots of systems in place. So you mostly need to make them talk. But from an external perspective, which is also how attackers see the world, you have subsidiaries, rogue assets, rogue networks, acquisitions, marketing campaigns. Connecting the dots there is just much more challenging. So that's the area we'll focus on today.
That's great. And you raised some good points. And can you provide some color on the top challenges with exposure management today?
Sure. So if you break it down, and if I break it down to just three areas, I would say you have the asset inventory challenge, you have the understanding what you're looking at challenge, and then you have the prioritization challenge. And when you're thinking about asset inventory, I think we were all told or promised many years ago that CMDBs will be able to own that. And the reality is, especially at large enterprises, CMDBs probably miss between 20% well and 80% of the assets, and have extremely limited context on who really owns them, what systems are affected by what have you. So CMDBs were supposed to help you with that. CASMs, asset management, internal asset management tools are more modern. However, they're really an IT tool that is based on integrations. So if you have your agents deployed at, say, 100% of what you're trying to monitor, you're good. The problem is, especially at enterprises, that's never the case. And especially when you get to areas like applications or multiple cloud environments, not to mention hundreds of them, that becomes, it represents fine the internal perspective, but as I mentioned, it really is not aligned with how attackers see the world and how you get to the top few things that massively matter, which brings us to the next couple of areas. With regard to business context, when you think about it, what you really care about is, what are my critical systems, right? For example, if you have this mainframe exposed to the internet, that's something which we have seen multiple times at CyCognito. That's something you should massively care about. But if all you're looking at is IPs and ports and CPEs, you have no idea what you're looking at, and it makes the prioritization, the third challenge, really, really bad. That's why 99% of the CASM and unified vulnerability management solutions show you, including on their websites, demos, but worse than that, in real environments, thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of critical issues, because they cannot tell what are the, say, 5 important assets that are exposed to attackers, that are exploitable, that attackers can find right now. That's what you, as a CISO, SecOps leader, vulnerability management leader, red teaming leader, care about most, yet almost no one is able to do that today. It's absolutely possible, but not just based on integrations and basic scanning.
Great. Well, in that data set, what do you feel are the critical requirements for solving these context gaps?
It's a good question. I would say that there are, again, 3 main things to keep it almost aligned, not exactly, that are absolutely mandatory and are not always understood this way. Number 1 is what I call real discovery. So don't just settle on what you already know and or integrations, but have a process or a technology that shows you that can lead you to real blind spots and what attackers actually see. Number 2, deep asset business context that helps you understand, where are my critical systems, who owns these assets, and actually map your exposure to different business units, because that's how you run your business. Why would you not want security management, risk management to be the same? And then lastly, I'll mention that smaller pieces that are extremely critical, like discovery in real time, not just once a month or a quarter where some human beings are looking for something, but continuously find these blind spots and continuously validate the risk. It's not helpful if you're being told, hey, you have 1,000 RDPs exposed to the internet, what have you, these odd ports, go check it out. It takes 10 hours net on average per asset, weeks on the calendar. So I would say these are the most important requirements.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Rob. And I'm going to say that, to underline that, full coverage asset inventories plus context really is the foundation for any successful cybersecurity program. And so these are super important elements. Let's dig into our details on our first topic, exposure verification. So exposure verification is something that often gets skipped. Rob, why do you think that is, and why does it matter so much?
I think that I like to look at the history of various areas and markets and technologies. And exposure management really started in the 90s with Nmap and port scanning, and then Nessus and vulnerability scanning. And so the underlying technologies of still most solutions in this area were somewhat similar to this nice guy on the right-hand side doing something that is really fun. And the thing is, when you have a small pond and you know that everything is in this pond, it's fine to fish this way, and you know that you're in the right spot. And in the 90s, you truly knew where your networks are and your few assets are, and like Apple and Google had one website. Problem is that many years later, now your applications are all over the place. If you're a large enterprise, maybe you acquired dozens, if not hundreds of companies over the last 20, 30 years. So now there's no single pond. It's exactly the opposite. It's all over the place, and you have to be actively looking for these blind spots. That's what I call real discovery versus lazy discovery, where the lazy discovery, pretty much like this useful image, which I like, it's based on known IP ranges and domain names, i.e. seeds, and sometimes integrations. And so that really leads you to staying around that pond, which is nice and cozy, but doesn't solve the problem, which I think most folks have realized by now. Real discovery, however, should require no input, no seeds, no integrations, ideally no configuration too, so no bias, but lead you to one, the blind spots, number two, where the most important things are. And I'll also mention that when you do it properly, when you start from mapping the organization structure, map the brands, and only then you're looking for the devices, applications, cloud assets, API endpoints, etc. Then you have these connections, and you can tell this is a marketing campaign of this random product, which is a brand of this company, which is a subsidiary of corporate enterprise. If your world consists on IPs and domain names only, there is logically no way to find such blind spots. And when you will look at whatever random asset, you'll have no context on what it is, how it was discovered, because it was arbitrarily added to your scope.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is exposure validation requires context, no surprise. And so let's dig into a little bit more on what context looks like with this example. Can you provide some color?
Sounds great. So here we have this very useful illustration of what it should look like versus what most folks are experiencing today. So at the top, you can see an example of this. It's the same asset at the top and below. And you can see that when done properly, you can see that this organization has acquired this other company. Sometimes there are a few hops like that. The longest I've seen, I think, was 15 hops between the top company, a bunch of subsidiaries, until you get to the final asset you're looking at that is usually in this context a big problem or exploitable. But at the bottom, we can see the common exposure management, EASM, if you will, in this case. And you can see that it's really like a more modern Nmap in the sense that you have an IP, you have the number of open ports, what they've added. Most ESMs over Nmap since the 90s is some whois or that kind of a context and some history on the open ports. But the point is, you cannot tell who owns this. What is this asset? Is it important or not? Is it at risk or not? And the other scanners cannot tell that either. So even if you push this to your vulnerability scanner, you will end up with thousands and thousands of criticals on assets that the data model has no idea what these are, what's important or not, what should you do next. And as I mentioned earlier, from what we're hearing from security operations teams, it takes around 10 hours net and weeks in the calendar to assess a single net new asset. So if you have again, thousands of these. What do? You're really gambling, and it's frustrating and painful to everyone. So this is just a useful, I find, comparison between what most folks want to and aspire to get to versus where most folks currently are or where they started this journey.
Yeah, that's great. Great comparison. Rob, let's move on to the next topic, which is security control validation and the context associated with that workflow. On the surface, things like knowing what's protected and what security tools are in place seem pretty straightforward, but in practice, it's often anything but. What data do most security teams lack, even with known assets?
It's a great question. So one of the interesting elements in exposure management is, of course, understanding what's truly at risk, which is a combination of asset and what it is, what's on it, is it important, who owns it, the risk element, but another critical element in security that is, again, easy to do internally at a couple of networks, very hard to do from the outside in or on external kind of assets that are exposed to the internet, is risk validation or understanding the compensating security controls and how they affect the bottom line risk you have. So one quick example, and then we'll jump to this, is cloud security and CSPM, CNAP, where number one, many organizations realize, especially when they have real discovery capabilities and compare these with the CSPM they have, they realize, oh, it's great, maybe it's the best in the world, but and some folks actually get breached because it's not deployed at these couple of cloud environments. It can also be deployed, but misconfigured. So for whatever reason, it's not identifying a certain risk, it's not prioritizing it properly, and now you have this exploitable application or S3 bucket that is exposed and can be taken over, etc., that you were de facto unaware of. With regard to web applications, which is what this cool example speaks of, it's also very powerful, where we see most organizations having thousands of web interfaces exposed to the internet. But even if you only look at production web applications, you would still see that between 20% and 50% of them are not protected by a WAF at all. So you want the capability to tell, is it protected or not? And what kind of a WAF technology that is? Is it modern or is it legacy and not working very well? Some research we will share soon with the world is out of the apparently 100 plus WAF technologies that are out there, I think it's about 150 overall if you count various frameworks, etc. There is it's clear that some players are doing massively better job than others where they are deployed. So you might have your critical application. For example, I saw recently this huge enterprise have all of their employees, because of their business in travel, they have to go to this application and check in to that thing every day. But in that case, it's not even protected by any WAF. So if it's being taken over or shut down, there is a chance that the business cannot operate. So that's where this kind of context is so critical. It goes way beyond port scanning, and you need that context and kind of visibility on the whole of it. If you ask this pen testing team or a BAS kind of technology, really monitor well this couple of networks, but de facto 99% of your stuff is not being monitored with it, that's a big problem. And without that holistic perspective, it's impossible to properly prioritize where you focus, and risk definitely accumulates where you're not looking. So the areas that, if you're not testing and monitoring everything properly, the areas you're not monitoring are likely to be the worst ones that will accumulate the most bad things.
I mean, organizations can have the most modern tech stack in the world, right? But it goes back to what you said earlier about coverage, right? You have to know what is being protected by that. And those tools often don't have that, or likely don't have that discovery element that they're more lazy discovery than real discovery. So they don't know what they don't know, right? And so
Correct.
huge gap with organizations today who might be feeling pretty comfortable what tools they put in place, but unaware that there's massive
Yeah,
gaps that don't
it's
don't happen.
important to make this point that if you look at the average top popular EASM asset management tool and anything like that, the number of integrations they have is about 7 or 10, even at the biggest enterprises. But there are actually dozens of systems out there, if not more, especially at the level of, say, a WAF like a Cloudflare or Akamai. So they don't integrate with them in most cases. Now, even if you take, say, Cloudflare alone, or any of them, they could have 20 or 30 or 40 instances because they're used by many, many different engineering teams. Each of them is managing their own instance, and even such technologies, platforms alone are not interconnected and don't have that full visibility on their own single technology at this one company. So that's why you really, that's the difference again between inside out and outside in, and why it's both more challenging but also more important to get this right, I believe.
Couldn't agree more. And thank you, Rob. Let's shift gears slightly and talk about a different aspect, different challenge of today's external exposure management tool sets, and which is the concept around dynamic asset tracking. So web apps and cloud assets constantly shift, and that creates complexity when trying to track it, right? It's a moving target, as you said before. And most organizations don't track them because they don't have tools that can do it. And it's very labor intensive to try to keep up with what the changes are happening. So they become stagnant by default. They have no other option. Rob, can you talk about the context associated with dynamic assets and their tracking, and what organizations can do about this challenge?
Absolutely. So dynamic assets, I think if you ran a poll with folks who are in exposure management, attack surface management, is definitely one of the biggest challenges that people care about and are aware of. And one of the biggest sources of this problem, which has also really changed over the years, is today you have technologies like DNS servers and the relations between URLs and FQDNs and IPs that often change. Cloud environments also, as you can see in the middle at the top, constantly change the IPs of de facto the same system. So now, if your asset management tool is either based on seeds and you have to give it this IP range, obviously that's going to change all the time. And I'm hearing from some non-CyCognito customers that they actually gave up, which is a bit crazy, gave up on dynamic IPs. They don't monitor them. They will only monitor some of them URL-based, FQDN-based assets because they don't know how to handle it. So the rapid change there is extremely painful, and we can see on the right-hand side, and there will be good news in a second, On the right-hand side, we can see how a completely random website IPs are changing frequently. In this case, I think it's every, call it, couple of months, few months, which is bad enough for most of these technologies. But in cloud environments, for example, it can be every day, sometimes more than daily. So you need a different approach. It cannot be just seeds and pre-configured stuff. And so CyCognito, I can share very, very quickly. I have done a lot of work in this area, both in terms of, we started by contextualizing a lot and sharing a lot of history and evidence on everything related to this. But recently, we've been also working on this element, which I find fascinating, N-core assets and specifically N-core IPs, to fingerprint the system behind the IP, which is really like an ID or a passport to the internet, if you will. So we fingerprint that system so you can track that system even while it moves between different IPs, which is extremely powerful, both in terms of amount of, well, eliminating noise and false positives, but also so you have clearer history on that asset, and you're looking at that quote unquote person, machine, system thing properly, and you're not getting confused by the passport numbers or what have you, the IPs that are changing. So more on that very soon, but yes, that's the huge challenge here that very few can handle, and two, what seems like the only right approach that I'm aware of to this.
Thank you. That's perfect. Let's move on to the next topic, which is attack surface visibility and the context associated with visibility, the broader visibility. Risk leaders think about topics like revenue impacting apps, sensitive data exposure, regulatory compliance, things like this. The disconnect is that most external exposure management operators and the tools they use spend most of their time in IPs and ports, not business layer visibility. So why, a couple questions here. Why is most technology focused on IPs and not business? And second, related, is what are some things that allow security teams to perform better and save time?
Yeah, super interesting topic. I think it's related again to the history of this field, where if you look at, I love data models because they tell you the truth about stuff without all the marketing, etc. around it. So Nmap, for example, and Nessus really had IPs, open ports, and with Nessus you also had CVEs, etc. And things slightly evolved since then, but most solutions, most vendors did not take the tough journey of trying to contextualize what are these things. Does a risk really exist here? And the challenge is, the way my co-founder and CTO Dima likes to say it, there's no silver bullet to this. It's thousands of lead bullets needed. Maybe sorry about the analogy if it offends someone, but it's thousands of lead bullets needed to solve the context and prioritization problem. So literally, if there are dozens of things that you can do that are critical, and if you do none of them, like most solutions and technologies in this area, everyone will be in pain. And when you look at UIs and you're really seeing IP, ports, and some whois data, or when you see terminology like, here are your domains. Well, domain is not a web application.
No.
It's like so far away from what you truly care about. So sometimes even by terminology, or you have in the UI of many of these vendors inferred vulnerabilities. Because maybe there were some complaints on this is a false positive. Oh, it's just inferred. It's true, we can't really tell. Well, now all of this is noise. So if we take a few critical examples of what makes a huge difference, number one, PII. Everyone cares about it. It's one of the very first, if not the first thing you're being asked to protect. But how many organizations can tell where their PII is exposed across their global attack surface? Honestly, I'm not sure I ever talked to a CISO who said, before we start to work together, yes, I have confidence that I know where our PII is exposed or potentially exposed across the internet. And so that single element, if we take that as an example, requires using NLP and technologies like that to classify each and every device, application, cloud asset into what does it look like and what is some evidence that this asset is storing PII, what kind of PII, and technical users also want to see the evidence, rightfully so. So that's one example, and it's so easy to imagine why it's hard to do at scale, why if you do it wrongly, it will be extremely expensive to run just from a compute perspective. So there's many challenges, but huge value. Then if you look at, for example, API endpoints, the world is now being driven by APIs. You really want to know where they are, who owns them. And we can see at the bottom, for example, this distribution of different business units. This is obviously obfuscated, but different business units and who owns these internet exposed APIs, which, by the way, you can then look at, as we can see at the top, which ones are at risk and which ones are also not protected by a WEF and might be like rogue APIs or completely mistakenly exposed to the internet. So if you don't have this capability, you might have to rely on manual pen testing on a fraction of what you have discovered or are aware of. But if you can see this everywhere, you can focus on the top 10, top 15 out of the 100 that are exposed to the internet, which makes it like reduces mean time to remediation from months and years really to days, or and sometimes even less than that. But again, to do it, you need a specific technology and modules to map and identify API endpoints within every asset that you're scanning. Like every such capability, it has to be very precise and evidence-based. So what I'm saying is, these are some examples of why this is extremely powerful, but also why the lazy way of doing it is actually not doing it, giving some data like ports, inferred CVEs, and some other basic things, whois data, to security operations teams and say, well, you are engineers, figure this out. You have some other systems, maybe the other systems will figure this out. But the vulnerability scanner doesn't know. The CMDB doesn't know. The CASM solution also doesn't have this kind of context on things. So that's where things usually break from what we're seeing.
That's great. Thank you, Rob.